It's really, really difficult to follow up such a masterful debut album. Many bands have suffered from this. Does this latest album from Seven Impale meet that same criteria? Let's find out. Contrapasso from Seven Impale. Seven Impale is one of those very large band. There's 6 members of these guys, all the way from Norway. These guys were trained in either a jazzy or a classical kind of a styling, and that is definitely felt on all of their albums. Their first album, of City of the Sun, really knocked me out. Like, this thing is just gushing with brilliance. Each time I reapproach this album, I hear something new. It's definitely got that classical, jazzy kind of a feel. I always thought that they sounded very much like either a Van der Graaf generator or a King Crimson, but more modern and using a lot more of the modern techniques that have been discovered through Tool and Meshuggah. And so now, in 2016, we have their latest release of Contrapasso, and I've actually been looking forward to this guy for quite some time. So when I finally dove in and listened to it, I'm not quite sure how I feel about this one. It's a lot longer. Their first release was just touching the 50-minute mark. This one is going a lot longer with over an hour long. And whereas the first one felt much more contained and much more organized and thought out, which is kind of funny to say with this type of music where it's just chaos half the time, this one feels a little bit more all over the place. This one feels like the band didn't quite know where to go from here. They started experimenting, and I'm all for experimentation, but I also feel like when you're experimenting, you do need to tinker and you do need to polish as well. There's a lot of times on this album where I feel like the band is throwing things on the wall and just seeing what sticks. And of course, this isn't to say that the whole album is a write-off. That is far, far from the point. There is a lot of really juicy and really great stuff on this album. The opening track of Lemma is great at just catching your attention right off the bat with such a meaty hook and a really oomph. It feels like the lead singer is really toning his skills here. A lot of the times I'm reminded a lot of a Scott Walker feel, where there's either a very high falsetto intermixed with these really dark and really atmospheric sounds, or it's a really guttural or a really deep singing. And Lemma does a really great job at facilitating this. There's a lot of really great atmospheric things going on in this song. There's a lot of like different harmonizations with a lot of the sounds as well. I know a lot of bands nowadays have been using a lot of the saxophones and trumpets, but here they're utilized very, very well. It is adding that brutality that the sax has with a brutal sound, and that noise that's coming through makes it that much more guttural and that much more oomph. Some of the sounds that they're making with a lot of these instruments, about halfway through in the second song of Hearsay, there's something that's just, I don't know, there's something going on there that's just grinding with everything else, and it's providing such a really strange sound. These guys are masters within their crafts in terms of providing a really interesting sound. The one thing that this album does have over their first one is it is a lot more heavier. There is a point within Inertia, that third song, and one of the longer songs coming in at the 9-minute mark, where it just hits you really, really hard with that percussive sound. And that's not just percussive within the drumming, but that's also percussive within all the other instruments. They're all playing right on the beat, right on time, which is a little bit of a contrast between the rest of the song, because a lot of the times they're not playing on the beat. So when they're all coming together and playing it all on that, it just hits you that much harder. But one of my favorite songs is definitely the fourth track of Langor. That middle section where you get introduced with this, it sounds almost like a Moog or a very early kind of a MIDI player going on. And when they introduce you to the theme there, they don't just automatically reprise it like I almost expected them to do. They hold on to it for a little bit and let that background sound and that background noise build, so it's building and building, and when it gets revitalized again, it's that much more impactful. So that was a really interesting kind of a take on this sound. And that same kind of sound can be heard on Helix, the 7th song that opens that track up. It's almost like you're playing an old Castlevania kind of a song, and that kind of brought me back to my youth as well. It provided a really interesting thing. Unfortunately, the songs that are kind of in between, that Ascension and Convulsion, they're okay. I do like how Ascension brings the listener back down a little bit. It allows for a little bit of a breather. Once we get into Helix and Convulsion, it does pick up a lot more, and we get those jazzy movements with those classical pieces. Unfortunately for me, Helix, by the end of the song, I feel like the band is starting to run out of speed a little bit, like they're running out of ideas, and this is where that throwing things on the wall is starting to permeate. I think like with this style of music, I don't want to be sitting for too long. Once we get to Helix and then the next song, I'm already kind of like drifting away from the music, and the more music that they provide, the more I start backing away from it. Which is a shame, because Serpent Stone is a really, really great track. It's got a really great build towards that end, and that is one thing that I do have to credit these guys for. They know how to create a great build. So when we're coming into that build near the end, by this point of the album, I'm already starting to back away, and they're building and building and building, so I almost am feeling like I'm not participating in this album at that point. And then we come into the final song of Phoenix, and this is the guy that I feel doesn't really go too far. Like, this feels like it came off of a King Crimson Discipline album, where it's very technical, very thought out, and very articulate in its presence, but it didn't really go anywhere. I do like their incorporation of like these sound clips from, it sounds almost like a sitcom or something with a laugh track and people talking, and for 11 minutes I don't know exactly where the band wants to go, and within this song there's no real build up and no real resolution. It's just kind of wandering the landscape, much like, you know, a traditional jazz song has. As throughout this review, it does sound like I'm giving a lot of negative stuff, but in the end I still ended up enjoying this album. And the more I'm listening to it, the more things are being revealed. This is definitely more of a slow burn album. So for that reason, I have to say stream this album. If you're a big fan of this band, you've already picked it up, you've already had a listen to it. And if you like this kind of style, if you like anything that's experimental, a little bit more jazzy, a little bit more classical, I definitely recommend giving this a spin. And that's about it. So what did you guys think of the second album from 7 Impale? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, let me know by commenting below. Thank you guys so much for watching. You guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.